Gerry,
Yes,
so happy
me.
to have you on the show.
Yeah, likewise. I'm delighted to be here. I'm actually honored to be here. I've been checking out your podcast and I've been a reader of your newsletter for, I don't know, maybe a year.
Wow,
So,
and to hear this
yeah,
from a fellow podcaster
yeah,
who's absolutely rocking it,
I
um,
don't know
I
about
feel a
that.
little bit shy.
I'm folk rocking. I'm not full rock and rolling it. I'm folk rocking it. Um, but yeah, so I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Let's start. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
Well, I guess when did I start calling myself a designer? Because first of all, I'm an industrial designer, and once I got into practice, which is over 20 years ago. um, Once I started working in industry, I used to sit back in sessions and kind of go, okay, the leadership, the big voice in the room, they do the facilitation. And it kind of hit a point, Miriam, I would say in 2009. Okay, if I was to be pinpointed, because 2009, 2010, because I used to be the head of a form of design, as I'd say, it wasn't big D design at MySpace. And MySpace, as we all know, was kind of a precursor probably to Facebook. Had serious traction, but there was very little design with Big D in the room. And at one point, I said, okay, well, someone's going to have to speak for the people using the product or service. So I took the pen, and I took the pen at the start of the sessions from then on, and then I started to facilitate. And as we all know, your audience is obviously experienced facilitators. Holding the pen is can be seen as a power play, but for me, I made sure that everyone else had pens in the room at the same time, so they were always welcome to share the experience and share the power as well.
Wow, I love the I love the mental picture with holding the pen. I haven't heard that before. And the idea of
Yeah,
distributing a pen to everyone to flattening, basically as a measure to flatten the room. It's
yeah,
beautiful.
it is a flattening exercise, and it's actually because I've introduced you to some of my good friends. That was crystallized in This is Service Design doing. So Mark Stickdorn, Marcus, Edgar Hormez, and Adam Lawrence, and Jakob Schneider, the co-authors of that book. And there was 200 of us kind of wrote parts of it, like, reviewed it and so forth. And there's a really nice visualization in there around, many pages, many pens, and one page, one pen. And I
Mm.
really encourage people, it's one of the pieces that if you go into an organization and you try and facilitate complicated scenarios, you throw your pens down on the table, there tends to be one person that picks up the pen and kind of, starts writing down what the rest of them are thinking. And I usually pause it at that point and I say, well, what's happening here? And they say, well, what do you mean? And I go, well, what's happening? Like, let's get all the people holding the pen who are documenting on the sticky notes. How are you feeling this? As well, I'm kind of overwhelmed because everyone's shouting at me at the same time. I
Mm.
said, so what happens? That knowledge comes towards your face, and what are you doing then? And they're like, I'm processing it. And I go, so what's the risk of just having one
Mm.
person processing that data? And they're like, okay. I said, it's like a
Filter,
filter, it's a
bias.
filter bias. I said, so it's not like one or the other. It's a case of when is this right? Where sometimes it's right to use that kind of approach, but then other times a leveler is really making sure everyone stands up, everyone is at the canvas, everyone has got the pen, everyone has got their own post-its. So there's different strategies for different times and workshops, and that's a really interesting play to observe initially how they're actually currently working because that'll form into their ways of working.
Mm. Thank you. And it's interesting. I usually early in a workshop, I would distribute pens and sticky notes to everyone as a
Yeah,
kind of, and I've never thought about the impact of that, of this small,
yeah,
seemingly small act. Um, hmm,
yeah.
now I can do it
Bec-
consciously.
Yeah, it is like to do it consciously is a big thing, but then also to call it out
Hmm.
is
Totally.
is a really
Yeah.
important thing. Saying, well, let's watch how you're working. I didn't tell you at the start, but
Yeah.
let's see how you're doing
And
it.
it
You're all
reveals so much of the team or company or group culture,
yeah,
and reveals the distribution of power, responsibility, but also support and maybe
100%.
trust.
Yeah. So it's usually a precursor. So this is what, for me, good facilitation is. You don't tell them how you're going to work. You observe initially, and then you kind of react accordingly to the group.
Mm.
And it's a really interesting way to see what kind of group you're dealing with.
And the way you explained that you picked up the pen, and
Mm,
then it sounds like a learning by doing process. Or how do
yeah,
you, because what is the connection between design and facilitation? It seems as if it comes natural to designers, at least the process
mm,
part. Then dealing with group dynamics is a different
yeah.
layer
Getting
to
it.
it.
Yeah, to me, the role of a service designer in particular, so I identify as a human-centered designer, and like that's
Hmm.
the network that I run. Um, Design and facilitation are one and the same at a certain level. Like you're facilitating these conversations. And for a long time, if I was in an organization and if I didn't ship something like that was now in the hands of the customer, in my mind, I'd failed. So I was like, oh, I haven't done my job. But when
Mm.
you look at the whole kind of the theory of change, you kind of say to yourself, sometimes you facilitate these conversations and it can take years for organizations to come to the table. So a lot of the time, you can just be sitting and listening and being a really effective listener, like, true listening, deep listening to the dynamics and responding to that. It's not a case of planning everything to a T and saying, well, this is how it's going to work on Tuesday at the workshop. That never works. It never works. So being comfortable with that kind of uncertainty
Mm.
around change is critical. And if you resolve that in a workshop by flapping around and getting all stressed and stuff, that doesn't serve anyone well. It just kind of
Mm.
shows, the bad side. So for me, design and facilitation are one and the same. You're trying to get them to the outcome that we're trying to achieve as a unit.
Mm. And the design part, capital D, as you said, I would
Capital
be
D.
curious with the
Yeah.
what the capital and the small d mean. Would
Yeah.
then be the design of it something tangible, and facilitation of the design of a process or something rather intangible.
Yeah. I mean, to me, if you're doing a workshop, the point of the workshop is to get one thing, and that's alignment, to make
Hmm.
sure that we're all on the same page. So to do that, visualization methods from the design toolkit are very, very powerful. Okay, they get shared experiences. They realize that their own perspective of reality is not the single source of truth. To have those breakthroughs is exceptional. Okay, in a workshop, to have that moment of eureka happen really makes the group feel like, actually, you know what, now we're breaking through some stuff and now we feel like we're ready. Whereas before, and many organizations are like this, where they believe that design is just a case of getting people in the room, designing the screen and going home. But a lot of the work that to get to that point, to design really great experiences, is with people, is with the people that are designing it, and parking those egos at the door, and parking any of their objectives and their KPIs at the door, and really align on the person that you're designing for. And that's true
Mm.
human-centered design in my perspective.
So the human-centered part is on the customer.
Yeah, always. Well, it depends on the perspective. So if you're designing for an employee or if you're designing for a citizen, they're the ones that are in focus. So you try and resolve that tension
Hmm.
in the workshop of making sure that everyone is still
Yeah,
focusing on that one person that we're
yeah.
designing for. What does it look like for them?
Yeah, so customer in air quotes, the person you're designing for. And you're using a few different terms, and I would like also for the audience maybe to
Yeah, yeah.
clarify. So,
Tribalism at play. I'm using my own. Yeah.
yeah, and I found it interesting. Yeah, the tribalism. Before we hit the record button, I realized that the service design network is such a beautiful niche and tribe within the design thinking within the facilitation world.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and and now you're pointing at the human-centered design. So what is the difference or the similarities between human-centered design, design thinking, and service design?
Mm. Well, in that sense, there's none. I mean, like, I don't really. I come from the school of thought that that is tribalism. So we
Mm,
speak about in our work about breaking down silos, and then we're
we
in
built some.
silos. Yeah, we're in silos in an industry. So, I mean, technically there are some nuances, but use whatever language the organization uses. Like, I work with many organizations, some of them are just very proficient in user experience. So I just use that as the precursor for all the workshops. And I say, well, let's get better at user experience. What happens if you have 10 rock star um, user experience designers all kind of working in the room? That's as good as you're ever going to get. What happens then? And they're like, well, we want to think beyond the screen. I said, yeah, of course you do. So now we're into the world of service design. We're thinking of the full omni-channel experience, the full ecosystem, and that's where a lot of the effective design happens. Like, I know, your listeners know that true design really has to include everyone who's involved in the delivery of the product or the service. It's not just what happens on the screen. So service design in that sense is a terminology. I guess it makes more sense within the design world, but it's really a permission to explore across the business, to think holistically, and evoke that change.
So it's not only the design of a service, it could
Well,
also, so service design could also be the design of product and outcome, a solution.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But it could also be the
Okay.
process of how you work and how you design. It
Involving the
could also
different
be
stakeholders.
absolutely. It's really a holistic way of thinking that explores and works together with business leaders, people who are designing the products, and the customer, or the person that's using the product and service. So it's really about advancing design away from just screen-based design, or just even a physical product design. You're thinking about the whole experience that encompasses it. So I know you went in and you met up with the team at This Is Service Design doing in Amsterdam this week, because I know you're based there, and I met with you a couple of weeks ago as well. Um, there's some really nice scenarios that they have within their training. One of them is that I use as well as an airport experience.
Mm.
So if you're looking at from an airport's perspective or an airline's perspective, they can really nail their app design. Okay, like, they can have a beautiful purchase experience, but what happens to that experience when it's within the airport hangar, where you check in your bags and then your bags gets handled by a completely different service provider, like Service Air? And then the buses and all of the other service pieces, they all have to work in harmony for those experiences to happen. So there's a lot of dependencies. So those handoffs need to be designed, those gaps in the design, those gaps in the services. Too often, businesses who think just at the screen level, they miss all these opportunities to
Mm.
connect those dots. So in the training that when I was doing as advanced service design in public organizations, for the Saudi government when we were in Amsterdam, um, we really focus on airport experiences. Many people have had those airport experiences, but from my perspective as a sort of a trainer, I want them to learn how to see and
Mm.
dissect services. That's the big thing for me. If I leave training on the fourth or fifth day and say they get it, they can understand what's happening, they can see how these services and businesses are being built. That's a really, really solid outcome for a workshop.
Where it's the holistic view on an entire experience. Where,
Yeah,
as you said, they're at the intersection with different stakeholders or different service providers
yeah, intersect.
intersect.
Yeah, that's
Beautiful.
really,
Hmm.
it is really powerful. Like one of the trainings that I do, and I look at is coffee shops. So
Hmm.
looking at different coffee shop experiences, and there's a place in Dublin where I usually take people from training organizations in Dublin, and we look at, you know, the proliferation of the line of visibility, so as we call it in service design. So over the last 15, 20 years, you can suddenly see the kitchen is now next to the POS, the point of sale. Like, and I'm just like, why is this happening? I'm like, well, let's go in and have a look. And we'll see that you can see your sandwich be made. Subway did it in the
Mm.
80s. But what does that give? It's really delivering the value of freshness
Hmm.
and, you know, trust. It's leaning into these things. So you can see how these services can come together and they can be designed with intent. So you can
Yeah.
actually play to the values of the or the principles of the service by including a lot of the methods from service design. So it's very, very powerful when you weave together and you kind of bring together on that journey to see how I see the world and how other service designers see the world.
It's beautiful. And there are so many layers then that link to facilitation because on a very meta level, that
Yeah.
the product of a service design process is to facilitate the journey of a user.
Mhm.
So at the airport or in the coffee shop.
Yeah.
And then during the process, so when you're in the service design process, you're dealing with humans and all these stakeholders because you have to understand them. You have to understand
Absolutely.
those who provide the service and those who buy the service.
Yeah. There's other people. There's other
Yeah.
people
So
all
there's
over
all the
the.
people work that you have to facilitate.
Yeah. One of my favorite pieces to do in a workshop, and as a facilitator, is really, you know, peel back the onion in terms of the relationships of the people that are working involved in the delivery of a service. So, what I mean by that is if you're going in to buy a loaf of bread, okay, like I'm into my bread. I love sourdough bread,
Oh,
and I go
me too.
sourdough bread with Kerrygold butter, just out of the oven. Anyone from Ireland listen saying, stop selling Irish brands. Kerrygold, the best butter on the market. But anyway, you go into a bakery, a really good bakery, and you say, "Hey, how's it going? I'd like to get a brown sourdough loaf." And then they turn around and I said, "So we play this out in the workshop. We call this an investigative rehearsal. So we're actually playing, we're doing some role play." And they turn around and say, "So what are you doing?" "I'm picking up the product." "Who put the product there?" They said, "Oh, probably the chef." So we got another person up. I said, "Okay, so the chef, what are you doing?" I said, I'm making the bread. "What are you using to make the bread?" "Oh, flour." "Where'd you get the flour from?" And you start peeling it back and you start building out the model of the business. I said, "Okay, so you've got three or four people working in the workshop mimicking a bakery." I said, "Okay." I go on, I order. I said, "So what's happening here?" "There's a transaction happening between money. I'm giving money for the bread." I says, "Okay." But I'm asking, "Hey, you know, how do I know that the bread is fresh?" They said, "Oh, well, it's just picked up from the shelf." I said, "Okay, so there's proximity, there's freshness." But I really want to understand the relationship that's happened between the customer and the POS person, the point of sale. And we can see that it's more than just money happening. They're a curator of that experience. So they're giving affection, they're giving trust, they're giving all of these other elements. So what we call this in you know service design is the stakeholder map. So the stakeholder management, the stakeholder
Mm.
map, the
And
ecosystem, the value network.
yeah, and what I hear, just to pause for a second, is also the revealing assumptions, to be very explicit. What are the assumptions that we're making here? So
Yeah,
if we're pulling out the bread from a shelf, as you say, it mimics freshness.
Yeah.
if the chef is just behind, if the kitchen, if the flour, so if everything is at proximity and at eyesight of the customer, we
Yeah.
assume that the customer will link it with freshness.
Yeah.
And I think to
100%.
make these implicit assumptions explicit, for me, that's a
Mm.
facilitation work. That's an important part of this training.
It's a really, really solid point because in that experience, if they went around the corner and they opened up the oven door and took one out, it's a different experience.
Mhm.
You're like, oh, I'm getting one just from the oven. Even better, like, you know. So, whereas if they went around to the front of the shop and it was wrapped up in plastic and it was ziplocked, you're gonna go, when was this one baked?
And it's interesting. It makes me think of this one bakery. They have the best sourdough bread in Amsterdam, and you
Where?
can
Where?
wait the,
Give me the name. Give me the name. Give me the
in the
address. I
West,
want it
Fort
now.
Negen. Fort Negen. Hello, friends. And people stand there for 45 minutes waiting on the weekend to get their bread. And it's an
Nice.
open kitchen. You see everyone working from
Mm,
flouring the thing, putting the dough in
yeah.
the other things. The oven is right behind the cashier. And
That's
so
the
very
thing.
often they say, "Oh, I cannot cut the bread for you because it's still warm." And I
Oh,
thought, yes, and now
you're like,
that you're
stop it. Stop it.
and now that you're
It's 2 in the
explaining
morning.
this role play, I can see how this has been intentionally designed and now explains why people wait for 45 minutes for this bread.
Yeah. Yeah. But as I would call that theater. There's a theater going on. There's a performance going on, even though they're obviously baking the bread and they're not actors.
Yeah.
But there is a form of they're selling the experience and they're selling that whole kind of service. As you were talking there, I realized during the pandemic. Do you remember the pandemic? Do you? I wrote a course for plural site, and I was like, I really that's where the bakery scenario came because I had to try and create something that was relatively familiar. But how you would use service design to transform those experiences. Like, so say if you've gone into an old bakery that's maybe 50 years old and there's one person sitting behind it and they do 20 loaves a day, versus a modern bakery where there's some hipsters in there and they're doing like really amazing stuff. They're relatively the same experiences. You're still getting the same product, but there's this whole kind of service piece that sits around it. And in that course, I talk about how you can actually use subscriptions to deliver the bread fresh every morning, like a milk kind of delivery, which is kind of gone out of fashion now. And there's loads of ways you can think about the future of the bakery service. So without giving too much of a nod to one of my courses, it's on the plural site piece. It's a short one. It's for executives, really. A 30-minute overview of um, what service design is and what it can bring to your organization, because it's very powerful when it's used in the right way.
Um, Thank you for putting that out, and we'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah. I don't make
And
much money on that course, so I'm not really doing a hard sell.
you may
Plural site
buy
make
his
most of that.
course because he's not making enough money from it
Yeah,
yet.
I don't. It's one of those
Um,
things. I don't know. Have you ever done that, Miriam, yourself? Have you ever written a course for one of those platforms like Domestic or Skillshare and the revenue model that sits behind it? Have you ever tried that?
hmm, yeah. And I wonder, is there anything too small for the application of a service design model? So I'm thinking of not the bakery, but a team of five working together, um,
Hmm.
delivering a service for a client. So how
I,
can they use the same principles to optimize?
yeah. I'm a team of one. Well, two. Steph is probably listening to this and they're like, what are you doing? I work. So as myself and Steph run the Human Centered Design Network, and I use service design methods every second of every day on my life, and I'm also in the business. So what business doesn't want to streamline the processes and make things consistent and get good experiences and get good rewards? Show me a business that doesn't care about that. All right, because it's so easy to do when you're working on your own, but it gets exponentially harder the more people that are involved. Okay, and that's one of the pieces that I say to people: you can really work at it at a small level and test and learn, and then really understand how you're actually working, how you're playing together, and then use that as a way to bring service design into the organization.
So basically, it would be, as you gave the example in the bakery, mapping out exactly what we do at every step and then seeing how can we improve
Yeah,
the process, where frictions, where we maybe making an assumption that we haven't tested.
100%. I mean, we are, like, and I say we, like service designers, we're not afraid of assumptions as long as they get, I don't want to say validated, but as long as you've got evidence to counteract them. So within service design, we really want to get an understanding of how the as is world is working before radically changing it.
Mm.
It's not a case of just getting into a workshop and saying, hey, everyone, oh, I'm so happy you're all here. Now we're just going to design some screens for the crack. We're just going to, like, design some experiences in a workshop over 4 or 5 days. And then, like, you're done. Now the future is going to be great because we've done this workshop. A lot of the work at the start is really about understanding the existing world, the existing ecosystem. Because if you start thinking about services like ecosystems, like habitats, you know that if you change one thing in that ecosystem, it has an exponential and knock-on effect because it's a complex system. So what tends to happen is people radically just lift and shift, like doing an operation on the human body, and they expect it just to perform exactly the same, and that doesn't happen. It's a case of constantly being confident in the experimentation, the emergent practices that we really kind of encourage within services. And I know you met Adam the other day. Like, Adam's a huge advocate for theatrical kind of role play within service design workshops, and he's phenomenal at it. So I lean into a lot of that stuff as well. It's really the emergent, the iterative approach to services, knowing that you're not going to get it right the first time,
Mm.
and knowing and you're confident, you're selling that mindset in that, like, you've got time. We
And
can build on this.
And what I'm curious about, and I would then love to speak afterwards about your human-centered design network
Yeah.
and what it means for community. But what I hear is you have to be aware of the stake, so many different groups of people. And
Yeah.
I would assume that as facilitators or designers, we're kind of trained in reading humans or understanding human dynamics, or at least being fascinated and curious about it.
Yeah.
When you're training groups or helping organizations to redesign their services and processes,
Mm.
how much time do you spend on just the human piece, understanding human beings, creating this curiosity?
Not enough is probably the short answer to that. Like, because I can look at case studies and bring it back to you. To get the permission that you really want to get, a lot of organizations really do not have the appetite for that. Okay, so I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, yeah, we get to do it. It is really difficult to get that level of buy-in. I remember a scenario where I was doing a piece for a government, and I was really focusing on the human side of things. A lot of it was around domestic abuse and understanding the dynamics and the precursors, and looking at the full ecosystem in terms of incarceration rates and so forth. And it got to the point after a couple of months where they used to call me Gerry Scullion, and then they started to refer to me as just Scullion. Where is he? Like this whole kind of radical change of, what's he doing? Why is he trying to focus on understanding these? We just need to get something. So it was probably a little bit of a poor reflection on me because I misread the scenario here. I was like, oh well, they're just super eager to get something. So my client didn't want to get that far down into understanding the true kind of emotional experience behind a lot of this stuff. Because for me, something like that in that scenario, is extremely contentious, and it's filled with trauma. So to do a design for something like that without understanding that will be doing a disservice to the people who've suffered that
Interesting.
abuse and also to the client. So there's those kind of dynamics are an exceptional case, in my experience anyway. But still, I don't think we do enough to truly understand the impacts of our design within the system that they're designing it for. Um, Another one of my great friends is Rachel Dekas, and Rachel is a trauma-informed design specialist and probably the number one in the world, and currently working at the White House. And we speak about this stuff all the time. Like, it's not, I've known Rachel for years, and we start off with small talk for maybe 5 minutes, and then 55 minutes in our sessions when we would catch up are all about trauma and what we're seeing in the world. And what tends to happen is organizations just get so focused on what they want to achieve from, they want to extract something from the customer or whoever it is. The real value is truly understanding the experience. So a good example of this might be um, Mother's Day, is one that comes to the top of my head. Okay,
Hmm.
right. For a period of time, we've got two kids here. We're blessed. Okay, we know we're blessed to have two wonderful children, but we went on a journey to have our children. So Mother's Day emails coming in or Father's Day emails coming into my inbox when we were trying for children was traumatic. Okay, I was like, oh
Mm.
my God. So organizations are, well, we need to sell stuff for Mother's Day or Father's Day. Just send out emails to absolutely everyone. And they didn't really, and you see it all around the world. You see it all, that happens every single day. Organizations are still not really truly getting to that point of understanding the impact and the impact that they're not designing for when they're
Mm.
creating these services.
Yeah, that is, thank you for the example.
No
Um,
worries, it just crystallizes when I throw examples in.
yeah, and it's, I think there's a big conversation around that also now with gendered communication. How do we address people?
Totally.
How do we include um, different individuals and give them agency how to be addressed?
Yeah.
And I think that it's only now that we become aware of even the small t traumas that are
Mm.
around. It doesn't even need to be the capital T, the big ones,
Mhm.
but how to deal with that. And I wonder, how do we then find the balance? Because they are everywhere. And it's important to be trauma informed to know how to cater for that or to be more
Yeah.
careful. Is there another extreme where we're then too careful and then actually are too blurry, or that we cannot communicate without having all the data, which then has
Mhm.
privacy issues?
Yeah. I don't have the answer to this one, but to me, we can probably both align on the fact that we know there's work to be done, and it's contextual to each scenario. So it's not a case of like, should we do it? I just think we have to do it in the
Hmm.
world that we're
And
in
then
at the
how?
moment. Yeah, the genie's out of the bottle, so we're never going to get that genie back in. So what are you going to
Mm.
do? Just believe it's not there? So the great organizations are the ones that are getting ahead and truly understanding the impacts is how
True.
I'd
And
respond.
yeah. And then maybe it's not even about avoiding all of these Mother's Day emails, but the way how you address it and how you frame it so that you
Yeah.
at least are aware that people reading it might get triggered or re-traumatized.
Yeah. Or it could be a case of like, um, in advance of those days, say, hey, listen, we're going to be sending out, do you want to opt out to them? Just
Mm.
giving control back to the people that are, within your database. I'm just using that as one
Yeah.
example. Like there's many others, but giving control back to people to design their own experiences and what they're looking for
Mm.
is an easier way than kind of doing data grabs and partnerships with people to get full holistic pictures of people's lives, which no one wants. Like, I don't want any more anyone else to have any more data than they probably already have of me. So there's just really that control piece and respect. I think for the last 25, 30 years, businesses have become greedy. I think it's a
Mm,
case of just really reeling in the reality. Like, I don't really care for 95% of the emails that come into my inbox every single day. Um, Businesses are still going to be sending them, but giving me some control over the topics and the themes is one way that you can actually improve those experiences and outcomes.
yeah, and it's true. And then we fall into the same trap where we think, okay, the more the merrier. Just send the email to everyone,
Yeah,
although we would write it in a different way. And yeah, put more
I
care
think.
into it if it was addressed just for to the subset that's actually really potentially interested.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like we're miles away, like from, we talk about AI and all of these advancements and stuff, but the real problem is still there. Like, we're still getting bombarded
Mm.
with content every single day, whether it's on LinkedIn or Facebook. Like, I mean, has LinkedIn really changed since 2006? And we're still looking at a feed every single day and we're forced to scroll through that.
Mm.
I mean, where is the advancement in these services? They've been remaining quite stagnant for such a period of time that the curation piece, they don't want you to, they don't want to do that because they're selling eyeballs. I know their business models. So this is where you get into the whole kind of conversation of like changing the business model. But from an end experience perspective, you really wonder how much has it advanced over the last, say, 20 years? Not
Yeah,
much. We become quite lazy about this stuff, I think.
because it's too easy.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
too easy. It's too hard, more to the point, to change the business model. But the salespeople have got much more kind of power than anyone else because they're bringing the dollars in. So if
Yeah.
you're to really challenge that, you have to be able to challenge the business model. So we're getting really into the conversations. We're getting into the weeds here now, but I really think that when people say AI is going to transform the world, it says, yeah, it's great, but I'm still getting loads of emails every single day from businesses trying to sell me like hard drives and data and all this kind of stuff. Like it's a crazy time to be alive.
It is. And I think it all boils down then to our value system and beliefs and what do we stand for in integrity. Um,
Yeah,
when we want to really change a business model or make a change in the world. And you're making a change
am I?
in lives through your human-centered design network.
Yeah,
Tell
I'm
us
not
about
going
your
to do.
community and what is your approach to community as a service designer?
That's a good question, but I don't want to get too salesy. I don't want to start talking about like, selling people in my community, but I'm really at that point in my life. Like I'm 44. I'm hyper transparent about absolutely everything that I do. Um, and I've trained a couple of thousand people over the last few years, like, the last whatever. I don't even know what year it is half the time. That's what it's like in my life. I think it's 2024. So the last 6 years, I suppose, I've been really focusing on training. And I set myself a goal this year to help transform 10,000 practitioners' lives. Okay. 10,000 is very adventurous. But the podcast has been exceptional. Like I've been doing it since 2017 and we passed 1 million downloads and we've kind of kicked all my goals initially that I wanted to do. And one of the things that used to be said to me when I do a keynote or something at a conference, they'd say, it's great. It really gives me ideas. It really allows me to stay up to date on, the themes and trends within design at an ethical perspective. You're not going to learn how to, do things in Figma on my podcast. You'll learn to ponder and question and see things beyond the realms of traditional design. That's really what I like to focus on. But I really wanted to move from ideas into action. Okay, so like really activate the community. And I'm only at the early stages. Like your community is, phenomenal. And that's why I WhatsApp you saying, how did you do this on your website? Because I don't know how to do that, which is true. I said that the other day to Miriam on WhatsApp. Miriam's been very
And
gracious.
hiding the fact that I reach out all the time to ask you for podcasting advice.
Oh, it's cool. Like there's a value exchange going on. But that's the community is now like it's 2 months old. We've got over 100 people, kind of in there at the moment, and it's going to grow. So the first theme that we had our first campfire there maybe 2 weeks ago, and I used the campfires as precursors to define the theme of the month, and the theme that came out of that was ageism in design. So as I mentioned, I'm 44, and I work for myself. So in some ways, I'm kind of very privileged that I can do this, even though it's hyper stressful. Okay, right? Everyone says it's great that you work for yourself. You've got all these other pitfalls, but we're seeing something happening in the industry over the last, I'd say, 12 months in particular. I don't want to say there's a correlation between AI, but it happened around that time where things started to change post COVID. People were leaving their jobs and so forth. But one of the things that's happening now is people that are in their 40s and 50s are being made redundant who've maybe very loyal to their organizations for the last 15, 20 years, and now they're out of work. And what does that look like? It doesn't seem to happen too much to marketeers or people in finance, or maybe it does. I'm not that kind of clued into those industries, but they seem to have much more success in having a lifelong employment. Whereas when a designer, all you have to do is look at design teams, like product design teams. You go to any tech business in the world and you look at the average ages, they tend to be about 29. Okay, that's the average age for someone in a product design role. If you see a designer in there in their 50s, you automatically will assume that they're the manager or the leader of the group. Okay, and that's not always the case. Not
Mm.
everyone wants to become a manager or a leader. So there's this expectation that if you're older, you're going to be more senior. Some people, myself included, I love being on the teams, but it's not really possible. 2019, Miriam, I was working on a project for a bank. At that stage, many years ago, that was probably just 40. Someone came up to me and said, we've never had anyone as old as you on this team.
Thank you
And
for reminding me.
I went, what did you say? Okay, right. And they go, we've never had anyone as old as you. And I go, you've never had anyone as experienced as me. And that's not coming from a
Mm.
place of ego. I said, you are hiring grads. I says, you really shouldn't be saying those things, by the way. It's highly offensive. And also, like, you could probably do with hiring some mids and some seniors in this business. So, because the juniors were just looking for mentorship, and that's what I was doing, just having coffees. I'm like, hey, I'm not paid to mentor you. I'm paid here to run this project. So it really is a huge problem in design at the moment. So now what we're seeing on that theme that's been created in the campfire a couple of weeks ago, now we formed a garage space within our community, and we're trying to kind of get these more activated to create something. Could be a white paper, could be a free course, something to help people in that space. We don't have to try and boil the ocean or catch the rain, as I say. It's just something that's pragmatic to start the conversation off. And that's kind of what the value proposition is with the Human Centered Design Network. We call it Circle, which I know everyone who's using the same platform, Circle, is like, you just call it the same technology name. And I'm like, I know that. But where I come from, being Irish, the circle has got metaphorical kind of connections to belief systems and belonging.
Mm.
And outside this, I'm in my converted attic here at home. We've got an indigenous art piece that I bought in Uluru in Australia in 2016. It's quite a large piece, and the circles, it's full of circles along a big blue line. And I remember speaking to the artist and saying, "Hey, what's the circles mean for you?" And he says, "Oh, well, that's the source of water and community."
Mm.
And I was like, "Ah, okay." So that's my narrative around why it's just called Circle. Like it's not anything original, but that's why it's just called a circle.
And it's beautiful. What I hear is through the campfires, you're bringing the community together to give them agency to ask them what they're interested in. So
Yeah,
you're facilitating
facilitator.
a large group conversation
Yeah, that's
to then come up with okay, what is really on the member's mind? So what will we be focusing on, and how can everyone contribute to create something that is maybe even bigger than the network itself, so that you can
100%. 100%,
share it with
Miriam.
the
Like
outside world?
I feel that the design world for a very long time has been filled with ego, white male ego in particular. I know I'm white male. I don't have an ego. Like I have some ego. I'm not going to be completely in denial, but the whole kind of perspective of like, it comes from me. I'm the expert. To me, just feels really arrogant. Okay, like it really does. So that mindset and that mind shift has to happen. Like so, not about me. It's really about the community and providing the material for the community to build their own experience. Is
Yeah.
how I'm approaching it.
And I would be curious how you approach the question of engagement, community engagement, from your service design or design capital D perspective.
Engagement's funny, isn't it? Not everyone wants to engage. I had an email from a member saying, "Hey, I've just joined." The reason why I'm whispering here is because their email was quite whispery, and they said, I've got social anxiety and I find it really daunting to post, and I don't know how to get around it." And I was like, well, unfortunately, the only way to get around it is by posting. So, and that was a really cheap answer. I thought, like, there's no other way for them really to engage in an online community without doing that at the moment. So I said, hey, you could always come to a campfire and turn your camera off. You don't have to. You can just be present. Um, but it's an interesting point. Like, not everyone is capable of just joining and, you know, posting and over posting and oversharing. So the engagement piece for me, I'm still in that mindset of like, well, the more people that post, the more engaged they are. So
Mm-hmm.
I do look at the logins. Um, we did something like I don't know if you know about I think I'm going to absolutely destroy this word, the Cafe Nespresso. I think it is called in Naples, where they give you can pay a coffee forward. So
Mm-hmm.
for people who are homeless, I think I've got the name wrong, but anyway, we'll just go with it. So we did the same thing. We gave away a bunch of free access to people when we launched, just to get people in the room effectively. And that works. But the precursor for that was you need to log in and you need to be part of the community. You can't just squat on that free ticket, because we'll give it back to people who really need it. So one of the things that we really focused on was trying to keep the price point really low, like for our community. And the reason why I did this, I remember we had a good chat about this when in Amsterdam, was when I had a Slack community like 2017, 2018, 2019. I think we had 4,000 people in that Slack community, and it was like a ghost town. And every now and then I would have a book to give away or something on the podcast, and say just go into the release an episode, and I said, okay, answer the question in the Slack. And it was like, flies on something. Okay, it was they would all come out like and they'd respond. I'm like, so they're there, they're active, but they're not posting. So the whole kind of free model doesn't really work,
Mm.
doesn't work. So we need something to be exchanged to provide that governance piece and that stimulus to support it.
Accountability.
Yeah, there's an accountability, absolutely. So the engagement piece at the moment is really, for me, the outcome that we create after
Mm.
each theme. So I don't want to be the person who's like, "Hey, everybody, where are you at? We need to get the outcome." It will come. It will come
Yeah.
over time. But at the moment, it's just a little bit kind of like a sheepdog, kind of trying to gather people and hoard them into spaces.
Yeah. And I thank you for sharing that, and especially the case with the member who has social anxiety and reached out to you to
Mm.
how to tackle that. I think so. we recently had a member posting about neurodiversity. So
Yeah,
sharing that they had ADHD and maybe some autism, and seeking support and how to deal with that within the community, but also as a facilitator.
yeah,
And I think getting to a point where these things can be addressed as a community. And
yeah,
I was amazed and touched by how quickly, how many different members were sharing either of their own conditions or their best practices, or
yeah,
linking to other resources. Um, that the moment we can get to the point where we create this safety for our people to first reach
totally.
out to us, but then even open up to the community and then be there for each other, then it becomes a
Mm.
real circle. Right?
Oh, totally. I mean that makes total sense. But as another example, just what I was talking about earlier, the systems like Even Circle, which is it's good, like it's a decent platform. It's not perfect, but it doesn't take that into consideration. And the only way for them to stand up and take consideration is by providing that feedback, saying, "Hey, listen, look, you need to do more in this space." Otherwise, they'll never do it. You know what I mean? So I love German people. I think I might have said this to you as well. And I love the fact that they're so explicit about. You're like, oh,
Meet the
that's me.
Dutch. That's
I'm
me.
German.
That's me.
I'm German in the Netherlands. Superpower. Okay.
Very explicit.
Yeah, you're like, you're bald. I'm like, yeah, that's right, I'm bald. But basically, one of the pieces that I try and do is provide feedback for absolutely everything, which becomes a nightmare for my wife. If we're in a hotel, like we were in Portugal 2 weeks ago, and
You're
I
one
had,
of those.
yeah, we'll stop. Like, what do you want me to do? They said, was everything okay? And I says, yeah. And they go, that's great. And I go, well, I hadn't finished. I was like, there's a few things that I've noticed that you could probably do to improve. And they're like, what? I was like, that was her expression. And I was like, it wasn't very good for the kids. Like, like these are the bits that we expected. And, oh, I'd like you to put that on an email to us. I says, well, I don't want to put it on an email. I'd like to tell you now, like. So I'm always providing feedback to absolutely everyone. Sometimes you can really gauge the level of interest that an organization has and the willingness to change by how they receive that feedback.
Mm.
So a good example is when I'm in Amsterdam, which has been a fair bit over this year. I love when they say, "Was everything okay?" And I look at them in the eyes and I'm like, they're seriously asking me that question. I love this city. And I go, yeah, everything was really good actually. In fact, this was really good. Out there, I didn't really finish it because it's not my kind of cup of tea. They're like, oh, thanks, we'll pass that on. Brilliant. Any of the places I've worked, brilliant. Over here, if I go in and I order a coffee in my local coffee shop, my old coffee shop. I'll use talk about my old coffee shop. I said, that coffee was that was awful yesterday. I said, I don't mean to be rude. They're like, you've insulted me and you've insulted my craft. Now you're insulting the shop. How dare you? Oh my God, if I'm like, get out. Okay, right? Not that that's ever happened, but that's how it's perceived. So the really good one, there's one person, his name's Hafa, and he's Brazilian. He's like, he hands me my coffee and he goes, take a sip. And I go, oh my God, this is brilliant. And he says, yeah, you like it? Perfect, great. That is one of the best examples that I've seen of like he makes sure that everything's okay. You're happy with it because he knows I'm a coffee snob, and that's what I mean. That's what we need to get more of. It needs
Yeah.
to be like we need to get to
And
that
maybe, yeah. And maybe that's then the downside of seeing it all. You mentioned before that through your training, you help the participants to see
see.
everything as a experience, as a experience that could potentially be improved.
Yeah,
And then if you suddenly see it all, you also want to share it.
yeah, absolutely. Or start a podcast.
Yeah. What? I have 3 questions left, and we have 21 minutes. Um, what remains your facilitation challenge?
um, In what sense? Like in actual action?
however you wish to interpret
Well, my
the question.
facilitation challenge, I guess, I am pushing myself to the extreme at the moment in facilitation because last year I opened up a second business called the Makers and Doers School, which introduces design to children ages 6 up.
Mm.
They were the most difficult stakeholders I've ever had to deal with. Okay, like 6-year-olds will tell you within 30 seconds if you're wasting their time. And
Just like
they
the
were
Dutch.
brutal.
Sorry.
They were brutal. Like, honestly, start at 9 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, I was crying in a corner. And joking, I wasn't really crying. I was sobbing. But they were basically, they push you to the extremes. But they make me a better facilitator. So my challenge really is trying to distill actions down to the core. And that is seems like kind of a very vague answer. And what I mean by that is making design accessible to all and not just designers. Okay, so we're still relatively exclusive to few. I want to try and make design accessible to all,
Mm.
and less around the terminologies, trying to move away from that stuff so it just becomes part of the standard vernacular for businesses and society. So that's my biggest challenge, that people procure design training. I just want it to be training.
Mm.
So that's my biggest challenge.
And you mentioned that these kids made you a better facilitator.
Yeah.
And I would love to at least dig just a little, one
Yeah, yeah.
layer deeper. What do you mean
I'll
by
tell you
that?
now. I'll tell you now because they aren't afraid to show their emotions. Okay, they're not afraid to feel weak amongst the group. You know, they some of them would, like, obviously there's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the group, and you can see the developmental stages happening throughout the years. When they achieve something and they make it that breakthrough, it's not a case of like holding it together. They are like really happy. Okay, they're really happy. So I love that. The problem when you work with kids and then you work with adults, kids are much more fun to work with, even though they're brutally honest. You cut through that kind of crap, if you want, really quickly. With adults, they tend to hold it back, and they don't really play it out as much. So it's a little bit like, oh yeah, whatever. And then at the very end, the fifth day, they said, oh, it wasn't kind of the training I was hoping for. And you go, you could have told me, and I could have made that change for you. Like, even though I do things at the end of every workshop where I get feedback and stuff, there's still a case of like the veil or the mask is still on a lot of adults that you don't have with children. So it forces you to really work harder, I feel, with children. You have to really work to give them what they want. You have to adapt.
Mhm.
You have to think on your feet. You can't be funny all the time. They'll see through that very quickly.
Mm.
Uh, so you need to break it down and distill it down so they can truly understand what they're going to get out of this session. So it's like I don't know if you've ever played football. If you play football and they give you a tennis ball to train with,
Mhm.
training with children is like training for a football match with a
Mm.
tennis ball. You have to be on it. You cannot just go in there and wing it. You have to have all your material set up. It's just like, to me, it's like training at altitude for a marathon.
Beautiful. Yeah, because then we get all the questions and all the friction points out,
Yeah.
to then make it smooth for the adults who wouldn't ask these questions and point that out. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, they are still the best people to work with. Like, it's funny. Like, I went in and I was in a school. I don't know what month we're in now. We were March, April, so it would have been around September time. And I brought my Playmobil Pro kit. I got a Pro kit. I do some work with Playmobil. Adam and Marcus actually designed that kit for Playmobil.
Mm.
So
Playmobil is a business expense, isn't that? The
It
best
is a
thing
business
ever.
expense.
Yeah.
I have to keep it up here away from my kids because bits go missing, like, But I brought it into the school and I did whatever, 100 children over 5 hours. Okay, so it was quite a lot, like, five classes, 20 people in a class. And even though they say the stereotypes, you don't think about stereotypes. But when you bring in Playmobil kit, like, you see instantly the boys go over here and the girls go over here. Okay, right,
Mm.
and they start working. And then I would always encourage them to present what they're building. Like, and I think it was we were trying to talk about superheroes, and the girl comes up first, and she's like, "This is my dog. My dog is my best friend. Is always there to, welcome me when I come home from school. And I love taking my dog out for a walk. It's the best thing." You both the little girls. That was really good. Well done. Yeah, it was a great presentation. You take the little boy up, and he goes, "This is a knife, and it's going to stab you in the head." Okay, and then they go down. Whatever it is, you can see the stereotypes starting to form. Like, okay, you get down off here to stop talking about killing people. Okay, right? So, but it was very, very powerful to bring these kind of methods of play into the classroom. The children absorbed it
Mm.
so quickly. I didn't have to teach this stuff. I didn't have to tell them how to play. So going back to like a lot of the stuff that Adam works with in workshops, it feels like play. Like it
Mm.
really shouldn't feel like work. And that's the bit that I try and weave into all of the sessions that we do. Like if you look at any of my testimonials, it's always like good fun, lots of laughing. And they're the bits that I really enjoy. Like I would hate somebody to say that they're falling asleep in a workshop that I did. If that ever happens, I'd be like, okay, I'm doing something wrong here. So it has to be fun, it has to be engaging. And that's what the children really kind of ensure that that happens every single time.
Thank you. I love that. And speaking about falling asleep, what makes a workshop fail?
What makes a workshop fail? Well, it's a good question. I need to think about this one. What makes a workshop fail? Well, I always start my workshops off by saying, hey, listen, I can bring 30%. All I have to do is bring 30% to my workshop today. 70% is on you. So I reframe it and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm just
We
the
paid
facilitator.
you.
Yeah. I'm like, 70% is on you. And they're like, so we usually do some sort of expectation setting. It's like, how do you need to be in this session? What do you want from me? How do you want me to be? And if I feel there's an unwavering happening or a wavering happening, I'll point back at this and say, hey, listen, look, I don't feel like you're being open minded here. So a lot of the time, it comes back to the people in the workshop. And I do that not as a way of saying, hey, this is my get out of jail card if this tanks, but saying, hey, listen, look, the material that I have is proven. It's not like I'm bringing in a magic kit and pulling rabbits out of a hat saying, ta-da, it's not a magic show. This is like, these are methods and approaches that many of the world's best businesses use. So for an organization to go back and say the workshop is not working is usually a case of like, well, there might be more work to do with the participants. Maybe we don't have the right participants in the room.
And how do you notice that they're not open-minded? And how do they react when you confront them with this observation?
Well, two ways of answering it. One is they can say that they shut down, but very often when you talk about it and you give examples to it, they realize that this is a restrictive way of working. So a lot of organizations kind of have their ways of working, the ways of thinking, the ways of behaving. And when you identify it, say, well, I think you're bringing too much political bias into this conversation. How does how does the person beside you think about this? And we have a dialogue about it. It's not about me saying, I think you're wrong. It's saying, well, are you being as open minded as you could be in this scenario? So it's reframing those challenges to explore it and unpack it, like what's happening. Sometimes it's a case of like taking them, for a coffee, or, saying, hey, listen, what's going on here? Like, and unpacking it. But more often than not, I think I've had those challenges maybe a handful of times in my career. Most of the times, if you set your workshops up at the start and you build that trust quite quickly, and they connect the dots about why they're doing these things and what they're going to
Mm.
get out of it, it's very rare you'll get that kind of level of pushback. Um, yeah, like it's a handful of times.
Mm. Thank you.
No problem.
I I love the pushback of or the reflection of, oh, I I sense a political bias. I wonder how your neighbor thinks about that.
Yeah,
I think that's beautiful invitation to just have a conversation about that and to stimulate opposing views, because I think very often in workshops, especially when it's about creativity, we settle too quickly for being aligned and all having the same opinion and perspectives.
yeah,
Although what we really need are the opposites, are the different perspectives, are and how do we get there? And I was just wondering, as you, maybe this could even be a designed in provocation. Like, okay, make a strong statement that you believe your neighbor would not agree with, and then have a conversation about it, just to stimulate and to get comfortable with it,
mm,
and to give them permission that this is part of the work we're doing here, is to find these opposites, play with it, and then
yeah,
being okay with not agreeing.
yeah. The conflict piece is a huge one. I mean, it's not a case of having amicability in everything that you do. It's not a case of, I mean, it's, I'm from a culture like in Ireland where there's a huge divide between Catholic and Protestants. Okay, so Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland. I'm actually very interested in the political process and how they actually came to that alignment at the moment. And it's not about really kind of always finding that common ground. It's about understanding the divide
Mm.
and what's the precursors to it. So being accepting of other differences is really critical. And in workshops, it's no different. It's no different. Like, you've got a commonality, you're working towards the same goal, but appreciating that they see things differently, and that's fine. But the bit that we're going to be working on is this piece. This is our outcome.
I don't know. I have so many ideas now, for another time.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Ask me anything. We're best
and
friends forever now. I've said that to you in
yes,
Amsterdam.
yes.
BFFs. Yeah.
Da, da, da. And as a fellow podcaster who's so successful, and I have this professional envy, I must say, when I hear about your
Oh,
numbers, and I'm very happy for you, and you have a brilliant podcast. I will put the link in the show notes. What have you learned from podcasting about facilitation, or maybe the other
well,
way around?
yeah, I was going to say it can be dependent on how you look at it. What did I learn? Well, podcasting gave me, like, for years. I remember 2013, I had a couple of workplace car crashes, is what I call, and it really shook my confidence. And I went to Toastmasters for years, and I mean weekly Toastmasters, not just the one that you do every now and then in Australia. And I was all about having the confidence just to get on stage and talk. Now you can't shut me up. But the weekly kind of workout that you do on a podcast about talking, thinking on your feet, a lot of that stems back to the Toastmasters training of being able to think and stay engaged and not listening to your kind of other thoughts that can happen mid conversation. They were all bits that used to really hold me back. So it's actually improved my research skills, believe it or not, like my ability to listen. I find whenever I go to do research for organizations, the podcasting side of things, being comfortable in the silences, being comfortable responding to some things that I don't really maybe agree with, and just understanding and being curious enough to delve into the next kind of part of the conversation. They're all pieces that you learn as a podcaster. And it's a skill that I unfortunately have to fail like for 100 episodes to feel comfortable enough. So there's been lots of correlation between that. I don't have as much fear getting on stage or doing talks or doing training, but I did at one point. So it's definitely given me the ability to listen and respond and build confidence again. So that's one of the beautiful things about podcasting.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. The feeling comfortable, the comfort with silence. I haven't seen this one coming, but yeah,
Yeah,
because you hold space for your guests to come up with the next thought or to answer yours. So,
that comes from research though. When you're doing design research, I always say you fill about 10% of the session with talking. The rest of it is 90% as a participant. Otherwise,
mm,
what's the point of doing the research? So just learning to shut up. And that's one of the feedback that came on my Apple podcast things. I wish the interviewer would shut up. It happened a couple of years ago, and I was like, all right, maybe I need to reel it in a bit. So yeah, those feedbacks on can be critical sometimes, and they can stay in your head. But it's something that I'm relatively conscious about trying to give space.
mm, thank you.
No problem, Miriam.
How can the audience find you?
They can't find me. That's the thing. Like I'm invisible. Only joking. You can go to thisishcd.com. I'm on LinkedIn. So they're probably the two best ways to connect. But yeah, like you can just put Gerry Scullion in, and unfortunately for the internet, there's lots of ways of connecting with me in there. So that's probably the quickest way of doing it. Like you, Miriam, you're everywhere. You're in my inbox. You're in Google. You're in LinkedIn now because the algorithms have figured out that we've actually connected in real life.
That's scary.
Good.
You cannot escape me anymore. Wonderful. Thank you
That's
so much, Gerry. It's
no worries,
been
and thank you for all that you're doing as well, Miriam. Like it's really really great work that you're doing, and it's fantastic to see communities thrive like yours. So keep up the great work.
thank you. I see you next in Amsterdam.
Yeah, for sure.